Good afternoon. So this video is a little bit different than many videos taken in the past because it's not Sabbath and there is nobody in this sanctuary except for me. The reason why I'm making this video is because time is getting short and who knows how many weeks, months, years we have before Jesus comes. Every moment we need to be finding ways to try to help people come to Jesus because that's what life's all about. When we all go to heaven, that's when we can build our houses, make our empires, do all that cool stuff that we all want to do. This life is the only chance we have to reach people for Jesus. So that's why, starting with this video, I want to make some videos talking about different subjects that I haven't had time to go over in past videos here at the Franklin Church. And with this particular video series, I would like to talk about some of the Christian basics, some of the building blocks of Christianity. Why can we be sure that there is a God? How do we know that the Christian God is the right God? And if the Christian God is the right God, then what are the implications of that? What does that mean to you personally? If you're somebody who really hasn't had a lot of Christianity in their life, you may be thinking to yourself, well, what does this have to do with me? All I do is believe that there's such a thing as God and then I'm good, right? Well, I think it's a good idea to re-examine some things, really look into the foundations of what we believe. And so the very most fundamental foundation of what we believe is in the question of, is there a God? Because obviously, if there is no God, then how do you know that there's anything after this life? You live a few years and then you're done, and that's it. There's nothing left. That's not a very happy thought if you think about it long enough. And so, what I'd like to do is prove with sufficient evidence that there is a God, that the God that we should be worshiping is the Christian God, and all the good news that brings. But this video in particular is just going to be talking about the question, is there a God? Can we prove that there is a God, or at least can we have enough evidence to where we can be comfortable with the idea that there is a God? At least that, but preferably can we be sure of it? So, I prayed before, so I don't see the need to pray again, so I'll just go right into it. So, if we're asking the question of whether there is a God or not, we have to kind of go through our options. It's either there is a God, or there's not a God. But you might also be able to say maybe there's a God who used to be, all-powerful. Maybe he no longer is. Or what if it's a God that didn't start off perfect and is learning more as time goes on? There's a lot of possibilities, actually, with what God could or couldn't be. And I'm not going to even pretend to say that any of us can fully understand God. There's no way. God is so high above us that it would never happen. So what I would like to do instead is just focus on the idea of, is there a God or is there not a God? And then we can focus on some of those other details later. So, okay. How do we start? That's the first question. How do we start? And it's very simple, actually. We can ask one question, and that one question actually can really get the ball rolling, and it's this. How are we here? How do we exist right now? Is it just by chance? Did a God make us? What are our options? So I want to show you guys a book here that I think is a very interesting book. If you want to, it might be out of print, but I'll show you it anyway in case you're able to find it. I'll go up close here. The Evidence of God in an Expanding Universe. I know that's backwards on this camera. I apologize for that. But that's the book. Very powerful. It says here on the bottom, 30 American scientists declared their affirmative views on religion. If you can get this book, I highly recommend it. Very powerful. One idea that I found in this book, I'm not going to quote it, I'm just going to kind of paraphrase it a little bit. So the very first guy in the book that they have talks about how there are 4 logical explanations we could try to give for why we exist. We could say, number 1, that this is just all an illusion. Nothing actually exists. It's just an illusion. Well, I'll go over some of the problems with that later. Now, idea number 2 is that this universe came from nothing. And so, we can go over that in a bit. Idea number 3 is that the universe always existed and it never had a beginning. And then idea number 4 is that God made the universe and everything in it. So, idea number 1, everything being an illusion. The biggest problem I see with this idea is the simple fact that everything is real, right? This pulpit, I can feel this pulpit. If you were here in person with me, you could feel my glasses, you could feel my hair, you could feel all that stuff. And obviously, it's not just some hologram or some illusion. There really isn't a logical reason to think that this is all an illusion. It's here. There was a famous mathematician named René Descartes. He asked the question, how do I know I really exist? He may have been somebody who struggled with that idea. What if this is all just an illusion? And his conclusion was, I think, therefore I am. If there truly was nothing, and this was all an illusion, then how are we able to think? How is there able to be logic? How can 2 plus 2 equal 4? Those kinds of basic ideas. And so, the logical conclusion is that almost certainly we are not an illusion, we're real. Now, idea number 2, the universe coming out of nothing. Okay. Here's my problem with that idea. So, obviously, a lot of people talk about this thing called the Big Bang, and supposedly, after the Big Bang happened, it was a giant explosion, and it created everything in the universe we have now. But before the Big Bang happened, there was basically nothing there except this like tiny dot, so small that it's almost like it wasn't even there. And that tiny little dot exploded and created everything we see today on its own. No creator, no God, no anything. I'm sorry, but I don't buy that. I just can't buy that, because even if I had a room, let's say I had a room deep underground, very heavily guarded, nobody could get in, no animal could get in, no bugs could get in, nothing could get in. It was just a room full of air, that's it, nothing else. No matter how long that room stays there, that empty room is not going to all of a sudden explode into a universe, if that makes any sense. But that room has more in it than this little dot would have had, at least in terms of the size of the room anyway, and in terms of the fact that it already had air in it. So, and air is something, it's not like it's totally nothing, there is air in the room. So, I guess what I'm trying to say is that if somebody tries to say that it's crazy to believe in a God, isn't it more crazy to think that nothing can become everything without a God making it happen? I think it's crazier to think that all of this could happen without God if you look at it that way. So the idea number 2 of something coming out of nothing, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And even if you say, well, maybe there's like a 1 in 100 Google chance of it happening, I think the odds are a lot better that God made it all. But let's go to idea number 3 now. What if the universe always existed? What if it never had a beginning? Well, there's one big problem with that idea. It's very simple, actually. So, it's been said for a while. I've been looking at this online, but I've read that at least some scientists say that the universe is cooling down, constantly cooling down, bit by bit. I've seen other ones say it's constantly heating up. It doesn't matter which one is right, though, because the problem's the same either way. If the universe is always cooling down or always heating up, and the universe has existed since infinity in the past, right? It had no beginning, it's always existed. Then the temperature is either infinity or negative infinity, if you get what I'm trying to say. It doesn't really make sense to think that the universe always existed. It had to have a beginning, if it is true that it's heating up or cooling down, whichever. So, idea number 4, God made it all. Well, a lot of people have a problem with that because they can't see the God that made it. Somebody might say to you, well, you believe that God exists. Could you show me a picture of him or her? I'd like to see this God that you say exists. Well, I can't. There's a lot of things I can't take a picture of, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. And I think maybe people are kind of biased when they say that, because even look at air. Air is invisible. And if you would have told somebody 500 years ago who had the same kind of mindset about being skeptical, that, yeah, there's this invisible thing called air, what if they tried to say, well, take a picture of it and show me this air? Well, assuming they had cameras back then, of course, which they didn't, but, prove to me that air exists. Well, I can't really prove it the same way that I could prove that gravity makes things go in, or I guess in our case down, but really it's in because the Earth is a sphere in the universe that pulls everything in. Gravity pulls in. And so there's some things you can't prove just by taking a picture or by drawing it on a piece of paper. You have to have some degree of faith that it exists based on the logic you have around you and the evidence you have around you. It takes faith to believe in the Big Bang. Because, okay, show me a picture of the Big Bang. Show me, and even if you do show me a picture of the Big Bang, prove to me that there was the God that did it. And you say, well, there's no God in the picture when the Big Bang happened. Well, who says God had to be in the picture? Can't God exist outside of the universe he created? Why does God have to be limited to space and time? So what I'm trying to say is that if you try to say there is no God, or if you try to say that because science can't see God, that God doesn't exist, you have a huge problem, because science has limits. One of the biggest limits of science is that if you can't see it or in any way detect it, you can't really measure it. And if you can't measure it, then you're kind of stuck to some extent. Because if there's, for example, if you look at a mathematical equation, the mathematical equation that, for anything, is a man-made thing that tells you the pattern of what goes on. So, for example, if I were to give you the equation a squared plus b squared equals c squared, that's the Pythagorean theorem, right? So the idea goes that if you draw a triangle, that the a squared part of the triangle plus the b squared part of the triangle is always going to be equal to the c squared part of the triangle if the triangle is a right angle triangle. So my point to all of this is that if you can't see the pattern, then science and math can't reconstruct it. God exists outside of the rules that we exist in. So you can't use the rules that we exist in to try to measure God. So when you put it all together, what you come up with is the idea that we can only look at what's around us and try to make the best guess with the evidence we have around us as to how we exist. Going back to those four ideas, everything being an illusion, well, I'm right here. I'm able to think. That idea has a lot of problems. So I don't think it's a very good one to go with. Or to say that everything came from nothing by itself. Well, every other time you have nothing, it remains nothing. Why would that be the exception? It doesn't really make sense. Maybe we should try to find a better idea. Idea number 3, the universe always existed. Well, again, if we say that it's always cooling down or heating up, then if you start back from infinity, then it's either infinitely cold or infinitely hot, which is impossible, obviously. The universe must have a beginning. And then idea number 4, a God made all of this. I see no problem with idea number 4. Because, think about it this way. If I invented time and space, which is what this universe is made out of, time and space, and then all the stuff that's in it, all the matter and stuff. If I invented time and space, then guess what? I do not have to play by the rules of time and space. So therefore, for example, in the world of Christianity, we would say that God always existed. He has no beginning. People try to say, well, if God created all of this, who created God? Well, that question doesn't really make sense because God created space and time. If God created time, then God has no beginning. He's not subject to time. He doesn't need to have a creator. He is the first cause. So there's no need to have a creator. So, can you have reasonable confidence in believing that there is a God? I believe you can. And something else I want to talk about now, too. And this kind of goes into a different subject, but I'd like to talk about it anyway. There are so many stories people have of supernatural events happening, miracles happening, things that just can't happen normally. One example I really want to mention here is a man by the name of George Mueller. And his actual last name is M-U with those 2 dots on top called Umlaut in German. L-L-E-R. Mueller. George Mueller. He was a man who was born in Germany. He went to England, and his life is one big evidence that there is a God. I'm going to explain it briefly here. I recommend that you read more about him, though, too. So, George Mueller was known for having a policy where he would never ask people for help of any kind, really. If he was in need, whether that be financially or otherwise, he would take the matter to God in prayer. That's it. Doing this in this manner, he received over $400 million worth in today's currency of help from people. And he didn't do this for himself. He did this because he wanted to prove that there is a God who answers prayer. And his life proves it 1,000 times over. You don't just get $400 million worth of help by not saying anything or asking anybody. It's very obvious that God had to have a hand in this. If you ever get the chance, I highly recommend reading his autobiography. And a lot of this stuff, too, is validated by other
So it's not like he just decided that he was going to write a book about stuff that supposedly happened to him. His things are validated. He's not lying to you. But there's some amazing stories where he talks about how in just the nick of time, God came through with things that, for example, there was one time where he started up some orphanages to help children in need because in his time, see, it was the 1800s, and in those days there was cholera going around and there was just a lot of poverty happening. And he was in England during the Industrial Revolution. So there were a lot of kids that were orphaned, needing help, that kind of stuff. And so he was convicted that he needed to start up some orphanages. So anyway, he's midway through doing that. He has some kids in the orphanage and everything, and he's taking care of them. And things got pretty tough at one point to where there was practically no food left. In fact, I don't think there was any food left at all. So he gathered the kids all together at the breakfast table, and he prayed and said, "Thank you, Lord, for the meal that you're about to give us." Right after he ended the prayer, there was a knock on the door. And so he opens the door, and it's the baker, the town's baker. And he said that he had this strong feeling that he was supposed to wake up really early that morning and bake a lot of bread. So he did. And he brought the bread over to feed George Mueller and all of the orphans that were there. That's great. Just as that was happening, the milkman, his truck, broke down right there at the orphanage. And, well, he didn't want the milk to go bad and to go to waste. So he said, okay, I'm just going to give this milk to you guys, and you can go ahead and have it for free. And that way it won't go bad, and it'll be put to use. Now, try telling me that there wasn't a God looking out for somebody that day. And there's so many more stories like that. But again, I highly recommend that you get that book if you can. It's about George Mueller. Really read up on him. If you really want proof that there is a God, look at the life of George Mueller. That should seal any doubts you might have if you have any right now. And I guess with that, that's really all I wanted to say for this video. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and I hope you have a great